Hello! Tonight I am coming to you from the site of Old Christ Church in downtown Pensacola. Pardon me, having issues. You will cooperate. Okay. And tonight I'm going to tell you the history, haunted history story of Old Christ Church. We're located in the historic district of downtown Pensacola, which is a very, very old area. Now, this church's history dates back to 1827, which was 6 years after Florida officially became a state, or recognized as one. In 1827, an Episcopal priest by the name of Ralph Williston stopped and visited Pensacola on his way to Tallahassee to preach a service. Sorry. During his stay here in the area, he discovered that there was a large group of people with an extreme interest in establishing a Protestant church in the area, as Northwest Florida was predominantly Catholic at the time. I hear people. On May 4th of 1827, Reverend Williston was in charge of a courthouse meeting discussing the feasibility of building this massive building hidden behind me that you should be able to see in my new static cam. Which, by the way, everybody say, "Hi, static cam." On that very same day, the Protestant Association was formed in Pensacola, Florida, and the very first thing that they did was elect 7 vestrymen and charged them with the establishing of the very first non-Catholic church to ever exist in Northwest Florida, which is this building right here. This is the original building. The first thing they wanted to do was purchase a plot of land to build the church on. This took them a little bit of time, but in 1829 they purchased a lot in an area of town known as Seville Quarter, and they paid $400 for this plot of land. This one that I'm sitting on, I think it's worth a little bit more than $400 today. Construction for the church began in 1830. 2 years later, this neo-Gothic structure behind me was more or less completed, and it cost them a grand total of $4,500. Sorry, there's another car. The first rector of this church was a Reverend Addiston Searley. I probably butchered this poor man's name. But he was replaced by Reverend Benjamin Hutchins only months later. Now, something you'll notice with this church is their rectors didn't stay rectors for long. Most of them didn't stay alive for very long after taking over this church. The third rector of the church was Ashbel Steele, and he brought with him $2,000 to complete the construction of the facility. Institution? The building, the church. He paid to finish it. He also started up doing ministries at the Naval Yard, as this is a very large naval port. Our fourth rector after that was a Joseph Saunders from North Carolina, and this is where our real story begins. He moved here to take over rectorship in 1836, and 3 years later he died of yellow fever at the age of 39 years old. And he was the very first rector to be interred under the floor of the vestry room of this building sitting behind me. The fifth rector of this church was Frederick Peake, and he died of tuberculosis 4 years after he took over rectorship of this church. Reverend Peake was also interred under the floor of the vestry room. Reverend David Flower was the 9th rector of the church in 1853. He died of yellow fever only 10 weeks after taking over the church. Reverend Flower joined his 2 predecessors under the floor of the vestry room. Now fast forward just a little bit to 1861, and all but 2 of the families in this area have now moved away to central and north Alabama, because during the Civil War, Union soldiers took up residence in this territory, and they actually used this church as an infirmary, a barracks, a set of stables, and even a prison. But according to eyewitnesses, those same Union soldiers took it upon themselves to pull up the floorboards and dig up the coffins of these 3 rectors. These witnesses stated that the soldiers also desecrated these bodies. In 1866, the rector and the families returned to repair the damages done by the war and start, the work of repairing and rebuilding their church. Go forward in time to about 1936. Christ Church was deconsecrated and it was turned over to the city of Pensacola. The people in charge of the city then built the first public library inside of this building. But in 1988, Reverend Beverly Madison, who was the 15th rector, invited an archaeological team into the area whose job was then to locate the coffins of the desecrated graves. It took them 2 months, but they did locate them, and the bodies were identified as Reverends Saunders, Peake, and Flower. That name's really hard for me to remember for some reason. They did discover upon their investigation that 2 of these bodies were desecrated, as the eyewitnesses stated. After they were located and identified, the community came together and they reinterred these 3 rectors under the floor of this building, and then they held a group funeral for the 3 of them. Now, one member of the archaeological team was present as one of the 300 people who witnessed the funeral procession walking down these brick sidewalks surrounding the church, and he pulled that reverend aside to tell him what he saw, and he saw 3 men, 3 rectors, walking with the procession, wearing long black robes and barefoot, with the one in the lead carrying a very large black book. It was customary at the time for Episcopal priests to be buried barefoot, and the Reverend confirmed for him that what he just described was the 3 men that they had just buried. They were also seen by this man standing in the back of the church for the reinterment, and sources state that these 3 men have not been seen since then and are assumed to be at rest. I guess you could say at long last. So, the rectors, ghosts, spirits may still walk the one hallway of this church, but nobody has reported seeing them since 1988. So hopefully that means their reinterment finally put them to rest. But to date, all 3 of them are still buried under the floor of Old Christ Church. And that is the brief history story of historic Old Christ Church in Pensacola, Florida. I hope you enjoyed the story. Thank you so much, as always, for being here with me. I really appreciate you taking your time out to hang out with me here, watch, learn a little bit of history, maybe occasionally get a little spooked out with me like I am right now. And if you enjoyed it, like, comment, hit that little subscribe button, click all of those fun buttons. It really helps me out a lot. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video, which the next ghost story should be the Headless Woman of Romana Street. See you later.